Well, an official watchdog has found more than half of police forces are not investigating crime properly, causing the proportion of crimes solved to plummet to record lows. 22 forces out of 43 in England and Wales were judged by inspectors to be inadequate or requiring improvement, with failings including missing leads, arriving late at crime scenes to recover evidence or catch suspects. The forces face an investigation next year. So what's going wrong? Palm Sandu is a former Metropolitan Police Superintendent, and we can cross to her now. Good morning, Palm. Thank you very much for joining me on the show. So what's going on? Half of police forces not investigating crimes properly. Who's to blame here?
Well, good afternoon, Emily. I think what's happened is, this is really shocking. There are over 2 million crimes that could have been investigated that have been abandoned. That's something like 6,300 a day. So that's members of the public who are reporting burglaries, robberies, and even violent and sexual offences who are being let down. Now, the reasons behind it, I wouldn't be able to explain the reasons behind it, but I can explain the statistics. But that includes over 6,000 rapes that have been abandoned. Now, that is a truly shocking statistic, because it takes a lot of courage for anyone to come forward to report any type of crime, but especially when it involves violence and sexual offences. So there is a huge a question there, and there's a huge issue about why are these crimes not being investigated. Now, some may say that it's because police numbers actually decreased over the last 10 years, but they are back up to where they should be. But that does mean that there are very, very large numbers of inexperienced police officers who are dealing with these complex cases.
So it could be that there are police officers who simply don't know what course of action to take. So they allow crimes to, well, alleged crimes to just go away, essentially. They don't bother investigating because they're not sure what the course of action is.
I wouldn't actually say that they can't be bothered. I think that in some cases, police officers need more training, they need more experience. And also, what are we actually asking our police forces to do? Because fraud is on the increase. So you've got police officers who are not trained to deal with complex fraud cases. You've also got an increase in cyber-enabled crime, which is not just the frauds, but also child abuse and grooming type offences. Again, you've got police officers who 10 years ago or 20 years ago wouldn't have even known about these sorts of crimes. So there is a training issue, and that's one of the reasons why the public are being let down, because officers are not trained adequately, they haven't got the right resources, they haven't even got the most high-tech computers to be investigating these crimes with. And the criminals are always one step ahead. We all know from fraud that happens through our computers, through phishing, through people getting PIN numbers and all sorts. The criminals are always one step ahead, and the police are always playing catch-up in those sorts of cases.
Now, Palm, one of our viewers wrote in to me just a little earlier saying his relative works in the police, is considering quitting because they have to spend so much of their time filling in what some might view as pointless paperwork. Is paperwork dominating police officers' jobs?
I would actually agree with the writer who's written in that letter, because police officers are more often than not doing the paperwork that is associated with these crimes. And for example, when I mentioned the cyber-enabled crimes or the fraud investigations, you don't need a police officer to do that. You need somebody who is trained in that sort of area to do that. So police officers are sitting there doing the paperwork when they should be out on the streets. They should be catching those violent offenders. They should be going to the burglaries, and they're not. They're tied up with the red tape. And in addition to that, we have got a number of police officers who are being used to manage protesters and demonstrations. We've had huge increases in demonstrations. So what are we actually asking our police officers to do? And is it within their reach to be able to do that and solve the crimes that we want them to solve?
I just worry that fewer people will come forward to the police when they're victim of a crime, because they'll think, why bother? Chances are that the police won't follow the line of inquiry, they won't follow various leads, and they won't find the perpetrator. But it was only back in September, actually, I'm sure you remember this, when forces agreed with the Home Office that they would follow every single line of inquiry for all crimes without exception. It sounds like that might be an impossibility.
You're absolutely right. They did make that agreement, but it didn't mean that there were extra resources or extra people to follow those leads. And when we talk about people actually picking up the phone, my advice is if you're in danger, if something's happened, whether it's a violent offence, whether it's a sexual offence, or you've been burgled, you absolutely should report it. Even if you doubt whether or not that's going to be followed up. Because if there is a trend, if there is a particular area that is being hit by burglars or by offenders, then police resources will be allocated there. But you must report it to even stand a chance of getting that investigation started and completed. So my advice is always pick up the phone, always dial 999 if it's an emergency, and if it's not an emergency, dial the non-emergency numbers.
Thank you very much for your time, Parm Sandhu, former Metropolitan Police Superintendent. Thank you for your time. Now, let's speak to Conservative MP for Shipley, Philip Davies. Philip, thank you very much for joining me on the show. So tell me, what's going on with our police forces? I mean, 22 out of 43 deemed inadequate or requiring improvement when it comes to simply investigating crimes.
Yeah, it's completely unacceptable, Emily. There's no doubt about that. The question is, why is it happening and what can we do about it? I think there's a number of reasons why it's happening. I think the police we've got more police officers than we've ever had before, but they're still overstretched. And, they're often the service of last resort. When everyone's tried everybody else, whether it's mental health people or local authorities, they can't get anywhere. They contact the police, and the police are expected to deal with things that are not really anything really to do with the police, but a lot of their time is taken up with that. I think the police priorities can be often wrong. We have these non-crime hate incidents that police are logging. I mean, what on earth are the police doing logging anything that's a non-crime, for goodness sake? They should say to people that something that isn't a crime isn't anything to do with the police, but they come under lots of political pressure to log all this kind of politically correct rubbish. They go mob-handed to arrest somebody for misgendering somebody. But then, as we've heard, burglaries and robberies and things are not being investigated at all. So I think they need to better prioritise. But I think the other thing, I've spent time out with the police, Emily, and there's a quite debilitating culture in the police that, basically it's better not to make a bad decision than it is to make a good decision. And so an awful lot of police officers' time is spent, in effect, covering their backs in case anything goes wrong. Because they feel that they'll be left hanging out to dry if something does go wrong. And I think they need to change that culture where people are given the empowered to feel that they can make decisions and not get into trouble if the decision didn't turn out to be the right one. Because whenever you're in a job where you take decisions, you make mistakes, and I think sometimes there's a debilitating culture in the police.
That's difficult, isn't it, to balance a culture of accountability, which we do need, but also empowering police officers to make those quick, important decisions that we need them to make every day that they're out on the beat. Of course, it must be very difficult if you feel like you've got the whole system breathing down your neck in case you make one small mistake that could potentially end your career. I can certainly see that. Lots of people talking in the inbox about the amount of paperwork they have to do, as you say, all those extra jobs that they're not necessarily trained to deal with but take up so much time. Mental health issues, acting like social workers, etc., etc. Although we do see this across the public sector too. Let me ask you about what's been revealed about Tony Blair and his government. We've seen these once classified files come out, published, lots about the asylum system, immigration. The Isle of Mull in Scotland was considered for some kind of detention centre.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? I mean, the face has changed, but often the issues that they're dealing with don't change a great deal, do they, Emily? And it's quite extraordinary that actually the last Labour government were considering, in effect, a similar scheme to what we're pursuing in Rwanda. I'm not entirely sure what the Labour Party are going to make of that. But look, I think it comes down to the fact that when you're in government and you've actually got to deal with these things rather than just pontificating from the sidelines, there is actually people come back time and time again that this actually is the only long-term solution to dealing with this particular problem. And I'm not entirely sure why Tony Blair didn't pursue it. I'm sure that'll all come out in the fullness of time too. But it doesn't surprise me that he was considering this kind of scheme, because I think people who have looked at it in detail have come to the conclusion that actually sending them to a safe haven somewhere else, a third country, is actually the only way forward. And maybe we should have considered sending them to Scotland like Tony Blair did. I'm not entirely sure what the voters in Scotland are going to make, of that. But yeah, maybe we should have considered that too. But it's quite striking that this Rwanda-style policy was one that Tony Blair thought of as well.
I mean, my overriding feeling, and I'm sure this is of our viewers and listeners too, it's also true, that, OK, 20 years ago, still brainstorming ways of dealing with this issue. 20 years on, still brainstorming ways to deal with this issue. Nothing demonstrable has been done to fix it. Rwanda plan is still not off the tarmac. Very, very frustrating. Is it beyond the wit of our politicians to deal with this issue?
Well, hopefully not.
No offence.
No offence taken, Emily. I would never take offence from anything you said. Well, look, I hope not. I think the government have got the right policy. It's just getting it through the courts, basically, and through that I mean the UK courts. And I think Rishi Sunak's latest bill is basically doing everything possible to make sure the courts can't thwart it any further. So, yeah, I agree. Look, I share the frustration as much as anybody. I'm sure you're right that the thing that 20 years on, we're still in pretty much the same position as we were then is infuriating for all of us. But it makes it really important that this year, coming up, 2024, we've got to get Rwanda off the ground because that is the only long-term solution. And, of course, Labour now have said that they'll scrap that policy even if it's successful because they basically have got no policy to deport people who come into the country illegally. They want to process them quicker, but they don't want to be able to deport them when they reject their application, which seems bizarre to me.
And Philip, just lastly, very quickly, your reaction to what Mike Freer, MP, your colleague, has had to say, MP Golders Green in North London, saying that he wears a stab vest in public for fear of attack. Of course, there has been an arson attack too on his office in North London. Your reaction?
Yeah, look, I've spoken to Mike about this before, and I knew that he wore a stab vest. I know that he has to go through terrible security measures in order to go about his daily life. The person who killed David Amis actually, they actually went to Mike Freer first and looked round his office, and he could have been the victim of that particular individual too. Mike's gone through a terrible time. And to be perfectly honest, and to be honest, Mike's probably had it worse than anybody, but this type of thing happens to lots of MPs. And whatever you think of politicians, and I know people don't have a very high opinion of politicians, Emily, and in many cases rightly so, but nobody deserves to go through what Mike Freer has been going through and other MPs on both sides of the House. It's completely unacceptable. We can have our disagreements, but for goodness sake, let's have them peacefully. Let's not put people under risk. And it's unacceptable what's happening to many MPs. And of course, the only conclusion is it's going to stop other good people wanting to get into politics in the first place. So it's counterproductive for everybody.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. Thank you very much for your time, Philip Davies, Conservative MP for Shipley, of course. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.